At this time, the United States is very anxious, because the toughness shown by China today is something the United States has never seen since the establishment of diplomatic relations between China and the United States. The most direct manifestation is that the Chinese Ministry of National Defense has not answered calls from the U.S. Department of Defense, and the Chinese and U.S. defense ministers have not spoken on the phone for half a year. This is the longest idle period since the establishment of the China-US military hotline. In 2008, Sino-US relations entered the honeymoon period, and the two countries even established a military hotline. The purpose is to communicate with each other as soon as possible in case of emergency and prevent strategic misjudgments. Therefore, whether the military hotline is unimpeded has become a barometer of the relationship between the two countries. This is the first time since 2008 that I did not answer the phone for half a year. The United States can't figure out what China is thinking, so the United States, which is used to being domineering, has used its own accustomed methods to conduct dangerous tests on China. A U.S. reconnaissance plane took off from a U.S. military base in Japan at the end of last month and flew southwest to the sea off the southeastern provinces of China. In the process of approaching the Chinese mainland for reconnaissance, this U.S. military reconnaissance plane was less than 50 kilometers away from our coastline at the latest, which means that this U.S. military reconnaissance plane was flying almost close to our country's territorial waters. Such close-range reconnaissance by reconnaissance planes is not only a blatant provocation, but also a dangerous act that directly threatens the security of our country. It is impossible for any sovereign country to ignore such provocations and threats, so Chinese pilots flew J-16 fighter jets into the air to intercept them. Our military fighter plane did not accompany the flight this time, but flew directly in front of the nose of the U.S. reconnaissance plane, forcing the U.S. reconnaissance plane to fly over the wake turbulence of the J-16. The reason why we chose to directly conduct tough interception and force the U.S. reconnaissance plane to enter the wake area of our fighter jet is to warn the U.S. reconnaissance plane. If you dare to continue flying forward, our army will definitely make a substantial counterattack. The U.S. reconnaissance plane, which was forced to enter the wake of our army's fighter plane, saw the Chinese fighter plane approaching, and after a turbulence, it was scared away. Seeing that China is so tough now, the United States is quite angry. After all, decades ago, when China's air defense was weak, U.S. military reconnaissance planes dared to directly enter China's airspace. As a result, now, not to mention entering the airspace, even when reconnaissance near China's airspace, it was unexpectedly intercepted by Chinese fighter planes. The most important thing is that this interception method, in the eyes of the United States, is a very unprofessional method. The original words of the United States are dangerous actions taken. Because in the eyes of the United States, our fighter planes were too close to the U.S. reconnaissance planes at that time, and the distance between the two planes, 4 or 5 minutes, was 1 second of flight time. To put it bluntly, China has adopted a tough stance of hard interception, which the United States cannot accept. You see, this is the United States that is used to domineering, and it is simply an internationally renowned double standard. You send a reconnaissance plane to conduct reconnaissance near our country, and you still have the face to accuse us of intercepting it. The most ridiculous thing is that U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken hyped that China rejected the U.S. proposal to hold a meeting between the two defense ministers in Singapore, saying that the most dangerous thing is not to communicate, and attributed the current difficulties in bilateral relations to China. Why does China refuse to accept the meeting between the two defense ministers, and the United States has no idea? Think about what you Americans have done in the past 6 months without answering the phone. Selling arms to Taiwan, shooting down our balloons, meeting between McCarthy and Tsai Ing-wen, pulling Japan and South Korea to form a chip alliance and imposing a blockade on China, but also to drive nuclear submarines to South Korea and lead NATO to Japan. Facing China's continuous suppression and blockade, while pretending to be innocent and saying that China refuses to answer the phone, it is really double-faced, saying one thing and doing another. This is the reason for not answering your phone call, and this is the reason for rejecting the meeting between the two defense ministers. Besides, the Minister of National Defense of our country is still under the illegal sanctions of the United States. According to your American laws, the Secretary of Defense of the United States cannot meet with the personnel you have sanctioned. The United States has been encircling and suppressing China diplomatically and militarily, but economically and financially, the United States is anxious to get China to rescue it. In dealing with the United States, there is actually a rule. Before the U.S. general election, no real cooperation can be discussed. At this time, everything is just a show for the election. Only when the general election is over can there be real progress. Therefore, the United States does not really want to meet. It is nothing more than a show. After all, now that the defense ministers of the two countries are really sitting together, what should they talk about? Are you talking about how the U.S. plans to provide military aid to Taiwan in the U.S. National Defense Authorization Act? Or talk about which strategic missile nuclear submarine the United States plans to deploy in South Korea? China rejects this kind of fake exchanges of posturing and posing for pictures, let alone coercive exchanges without any sincerity under sanctions and provocations. It just so happened that the Incense Conference opened today. If the United States is still elusive about China's thoughts, you can listen to the speeches made by our defense ministers. As long as you can listen to your heart, you will definitely benefit a lot. The US government doesn't even look at it, and has been clamoring for a few years to decouple from China. As a result, several US giants have been scrambling to come to China for activities recently. The CEOs of JP Morgan Chase, Tesla, Starbucks, and other international financial groups and large companies have gathered in China this week to express their desire and confidence in the Chinese market on various occasions. As soon as Musk left, Huang Rongxuan, the founder of the American chip giant Nvidia, was about to come. Now more and more CEOs of large American companies have begun to visit China, but they did not take the chartered plane of the US government, but came alone. This is the choice of free will, and the US government must respect the wishes of these companies. If you really want to talk about cooperation, you must show enough sincerity and conditions. If there is no benefit, why should we do it? Not to mention that the current US government doesn't even have the minimum sincerity. It seems that the United States will not bow its head unless it is absolutely necessary. When it really happens, the conditions will be different. At least judging from the current situation, the United States will not stop its new Cold War actions, but will continue to intensify its efforts. At this stage, the goal of the United States has not changed in the slightest, and it will only continue to suppress China's survival and development. Fighting without breaking is the keynote of Sino-US relations now, but the current initiative is already on our side. Today is different from the past. The United States had better get used to the current China, because we will only get tougher in the future. One of the most important domestic issues is the recovery of real estate. If the real estate does not recover, it is difficult to say that the Chinese economy will fully recover. In addition, it is very important whether the changes in the export situation and the recovery of consumption can continue. 2. Overseas, how the Federal Reserve balances the risk of inflation and the risk of recession due to excessive monetary contraction, and whether oil prices will rise again are worthy of attention. 3. After the impact of the Silicon Valley Bank incident, credit conditions in the U.S. financial system are tightening. It is still difficult to judge whether there will be a crisis like the one in 2008. 4. U.S. stocks are far from reflecting systemic risk. U.S. technology stocks are still very expensive. If we really want to enter a recession, the current market performance is inconsistent. 5. The investment opportunities of companies with Chinese prefixes and national prefixes in this round can be compared to 2005, and this wave of market has not yet come to an end. In an uncertain environment, these companies have effective structures, operational certainty, and good cash flow. And these advantages have not been fully reflected in the stock price. 6. As long as there is liquidity and the valuation is not too expensive when the market starts, there will be a wave of rise in the stock market. The rise of a shares to 3,500 points is already a bull market in terms of technical definition, and there is no technical controversy. 7. The world has changed, and macro investment is the largest beta. Volatility is progress. We must embrace volatility and use new models to think and allocate assets. 1. Says the Fed will cut rates soon. Logic is not enough. Brokerage China, what do you think of the current global macro environment? Which issues are you most concerned about now? Hong Hao, there are several major factors in the world. Let's talk about the country first. The most important thing in the country is the recovery of real estate. If the real estate does not recover, it is difficult to say that the Chinese economy will fully recover. In China, these two things are most important these days. First, the alternation of economic cycles between China and the United States will affect the situation of China's exports. Geopolitical factors and the tightening of monetary policy by the Federal Reserve will all suppress the import demand in the United States, which in turn will lead to a corresponding slowdown in China's exports. In the past 2 years, exports have been a very important driving factor for China's economy. The growth rate in the fourth quarter of last year declined. Although China in March was very good, the sustainability is doubtful. Therefore, everyone is very concerned about the outlook for exports. Under the tightening pattern, how will it affect the Chinese economy? Second, consumption is better than expected. Can it be sustained? Although I think it can be sustainable, everyone is still desperately saving money and not spending, and inflation pressure is not too great, which shows that the willingness to consume domestically is relatively weak. Overseas, it is obvious that in addition to geopolitics affecting the entire semiconductor industry chain, the more important thing is the Federal Reserve. Now the risk of recession in the United States is very obvious. How the Fed balances the risk of inflation and the risk of recession due to excessive monetary contraction may be the most important question for the market. Concerned. The other is oil. Will OPEC Plus continue to cut production in order to protect prices, resulting in high oil prices? If stagflation may occur in this way, the situation of double-killing stocks and debts will appear again overseas. Recently, signs of stagflation in Europe have been very clear. These are perhaps some of the most obvious risks. Brokerage China, you mentioned the Fed's policy just now. After the problems of banks such as Silicon Valley Bank in the United States, the market now expects that the Fed may accelerate the shift in monetary policy. What do you think of this? Hong Hao, it is generally believed that one more interest rate hike will be the end of the day, or even stop in May. It is absolutely impossible to start cutting interest rates, and it has never happened in history. After the Silicon Valley Bank shock, credit conditions in the system tightened. Note, however, that the tightening of credit conditions happened before the Silicon Valley Bank debacle, not after. Therefore, the logic of citing the bankruptcy of Silicon Valley Bank as a rate cut does not make sense. The loan objects of small and medium-sized banks in the United States are mainly commercial real estate, which involves a wide range of areas. Will there be a crisis like in 2008? Because the current impact has not yet spread, it is difficult to judge. Our information comes from the disclosure of a large group like Blackstone, but I believe that this thunderstorm is by no means an accidental event, and other competitors will definitely have thunderstorms. Because it is difficult to judge, it is a risk. Brokerage China, so in your opinion, the US financial market can't be said to have gotten out of the previous turmoil, can it? Hong Hao, in fact, there was not much turmoil. Even if there was a thunderstorm in Silicon Valley, it actually fell by 2 or 3 points. Now the S&P 500 has returned to 4,100 points. I don't think it is turbulent, and it is far from reflecting systemic risk. US technology stocks are still expensive, and relative performance is back to record highs. If we are really going to enter a recession now, it is inconsistent with the status quo. Tesla is cutting prices and laying off employees, but Tesla's stock price has almost doubled. These things will eventually affect the US market. Although our Chinese market has begun to have an independent market, if the United States is not good, we will be dragged down, but it may not be like them. 02. Shares are already a technical bull market, thematic. Opportunities look at artificial intelligence, semiconductors, Chinese prefixes. Brokerage China, you just mentioned that the key point of China's recovery may be real estate. What do you think of the prospect of this round of domestic recovery? Under the judgment of the prospect of recovery, what investment opportunities may it bring? Hong Hao, the recovery is taking place, and some of the corresponding investment opportunities have been realized. The index has risen by nearly 20% from October last year to now, and is close to the target price of 3,500 points we set at the end of October last year. At that time, the Shanghai Stock Exchange was still around 2,800 points. The next step may not necessarily be a systematic opportunity for a sharp rise as a whole, but an opportunity for sectoral differentiation. The overall index may slow down when it reaches 3,400 points, but this year there are many themed opportunities, such as AI, artificial intelligence, semiconductors, companies with Chinese and Chinese prefixes. These companies were forced to delist from the US market 2 years ago, which made the market very pessimistic about their prospects. However, the delisting actually resolved the uncertainty of the ownership structure of these companies. This opportunity can be simply compared to with the share reform in 2005. I believe that this wave of Chinese and Chinese prefixes is not over yet. Especially now that the overall economy is still unclear. Although they have risen a lot, in an uncertain environment, there is certainty in the ownership structure and certainty in operations. The good cash flow of these companies is still not fully reflected in the stock price. Brokerage China, in the past period of time, funds, especially overseas funds, did not pay much attention to large state-owned enterprises. Will the preference of funds change in the future? Hong Hao, changes have taken place. In the past, I used to speculate in small-cap stocks and specialize in new products. Looking back, no one bought the company that was a cash cow. I am simply sorry for myself. We have already mentioned this trending opportunity when we held the annual meeting of Sirui Group in February, and this opportunity is still being developed. Even if it has risen so much today, it still has not finished. Brokerage China, you had a conversation with Liu Yonghui some time ago and talked about the issue of the bull market. In the past 2 years, domestic investors have been suffering as a whole, including some stock fund managers. The market has turned warm this year, and more people are looking forward to a bull market. From your past research and analysis on the cycle, what conditions may be met for the emergence of a bull market? Is there such an opportunity in the Chinese stock market now? Hong Hao, compared with the 2,800 points at the end of October last year, 3,500 points is a bull market. Technically speaking, there is nothing indisputable. Of course, every year someone calls a bull market. We must be patient when investing. As long as there is liquidity and dreams, and the valuation is not too expensive when the market starts, there will be a wave of increases. At 2,800 points, I told everyone that this year is a bull market. Looking back now, my prediction of China's economy and market at the end of October last year was basically realized. 03. Opportunities at critical moments are anti-human. Brokerage China, you have always been an expert in macro research, including strategy, and soon you will be managing products as a fund manager. How do you view such a career transition? What changes might this bring? Hong Hao, excellent fund managers are all driven by research. Many of my good friends and good fund managers are from research backgrounds. It is a relatively natural transformation from a good researcher to a good fund manager. Of course, having a position will definitely affect your mood, especially if you are a particularly responsible fund manager. It will have a great impact on your mood fluctuations, because you don't want your clients to lose money. This is a sense of responsibility, and a conscience is also what we should pay attention to when we manage funds. For customers, first of all, we need to design a product, which is based on research and model-oriented, plus our more than 20 years of experience in market economic cycles to judge and support. At the same time, the designed products need to find the right investors. Otherwise, when the market plummets, investors often cannot bear the shock of the plunge and redeem them, which will cause fund managers to be pressured to change strategies. This is also a very critical factor. Of course, there are also some famous lessons learned from the past. The researcher became a fund manager, but the performance was not very good. It's a personal challenge for me. I rarely see clients and I prefer to do research and then put it into practice. It's like a gourmet who writes food reviews all day long, but he doesn't know how to cook, then this gourmet is useless. I believe that with my sense of responsibility, experience, team, model, and years of accumulation, it shouldn't be something I cannot do to successfully complete this transition. Brokerage China, we have seen many investment managers who are excellent in analysis and strategy, but once they change their identities and become investment managers, they sometimes behave irrationally. Do you think you might have this problem? Is there any method in terms of emotional control? Hong Hao, everyone will have this problem, but it depends on how you control it. It is definitely not happy to see losing money, which is why there must be a model to regulate your behavior so that you can carry it when you are most uncomfortable. Why have my historical results in judging market buying points for so many years been very good? It is because the inflection point is when you feel the most uncomfortable and the most stressful. At this time, you have to do it against your own humanity. Some people can use models to make orders automatically. When I reach this critical point sometimes, I will do the opposite. This is a behavior habit I have developed over the years, and there is no way to imitate it. For example, at the end of October last year, the Hong Kong Hang Seng Index fell by more than 2,000 points a day, which was terrible. It also fell by 2,000 points a day during the new crown. It seemed that I was the only one in the whole market shouting buy there. People thought I was out of my mind. There was a problem, but a few months later, my forward-looking prediction was proven correct by the market, and everyone felt that they bought less. This is the truest portrayal of human nature. Of course, not everyone is suitable to be a fund manager, and not everyone is suitable to be an investor, which is why there are very few good fund managers and good researchers. Because these people want to act contrary to human nature at the critical moment, and only the inflection point can change life. If everyone is following the trend and following the trend, then everyone's movements and directions are the same, only the speed is different. It won't change your life. When you reach the inflection point and have to face it yourself, you will have a deep understanding of the things I just mentioned. 04. Macro is the biggest beta. Brokerage China, you just mentioned putting research into practice. In your opinion, how should the results of macro research be effectively implemented in specific investment practices, so as to achieve better investment performance? What methods and means are possible? How? In fact, investment can be simply summarized. First, it is necessary to find an asymmetric payoff. For example, at the end of October last year, the market fell sharply. At the bottom of the market, the we wrote at that time was a typical asymmetric return, because the downside space is small and the upside room is huge. At the same time, domestic friends only trade in A shares and have lost many opportunities in the international market. This is what we hope to fill in for investors. Second, expand the horizon of investment, join some low correlation investment markets, reduce the rate of return and risk of the entire investment portfolio, and make more scientific allocations. Domestic quantitative funds seem to have good returns, but many seemingly stable profit models are not necessarily stable at critical times. For example, last year's stock and bond double kill, even Bridgewater lost money. If the strategy is to make only a small profit per transaction, adding leverage can magnify the return. But it can also be a deadly trick, as market liquidity tightens and asset class correlations reverse. So there are pros and cons. And what I earn is cognitive money, not trading money. What I do is allocation, looking for asymmetric opportunities, scientifically allocating assets with low correlation, so that the entire investment portfolio can add value to investors, and at the same time focus on managing drawdowns. Third, capital efficiency. The products I have designed for more than 20 years have an average of less than 100 trading days in the market every year. Many people do not understand the strategic nature of short positions, but in fact, this way of capital efficiency is very high. We used to be very entangled as a seller, we must choose the best time to the day. In fact, it is not. It is more important to choose the time to find a time period that is conducive to risk. This is a time period with asymmetric returns, and then you can step on the accelerator. Over the past 30 years, my model drawdown is very small. All important risk points such as 9/11 in 2001, subprime mortgage in 2008, bubble in 2015, trade friction in 2018, new crown in 2020 and historic turmoil in 2022, my models have avoided one by one, and every pit has been avoided. Many people don't understand that hiding from pitfalls is more important than getting high returns. Hiding from pitfalls is to make a lot of money. Hiding from pitfalls is to help your investors stay with you instead of being forced to redeem them in a crisis. I myself am a person with a relatively low risk appetite. Although I say seeking wealth while seeking insurance, I think seeking wealth while maintaining stability may be more suitable for my personality. These are the differences between me and others. Broker China, in the past few years, we have seen a phenomenon. Many people said that macro research is useless, because many people bought white horse stocks at that time, and many people said that macro research may be useless in that wave of market conditions. But in the past 2 years, fund managers or strategic analysts who are good at macro research have shined. What is the reason behind it? Can you please share? How? People who have been engaged in pure macroeconomics in the past 10 years have basically withdrawn. In the past 40 years, the end of the Cold War has created a very peaceful environment, in which there are only two macro trends. One is that the US inflation continues to decline, resulting in a downward trend in interest rates, and the other is China's entry into the WTO, World Trade Organization. Forecast is required. But this will not be the case in the future. Geopolitical changes will definitely create a market with high volatility. Will the peace dividend of the past 40 years repeat itself in the next 40 years? I believe it is difficult. We need to embrace volatility, and volatility is progress. When the volatility comes, it is when we who engage in macroeconomics can enjoy it. Now that the renminbi is internationalized, the Middle East does not listen to the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Iran signed a contract in Beijing, and Apple said it would put its factory in India. These were hard to imagine before. The world has changed. We used to think that a peaceful environment was an established prerequisite, but the next period may not exist, and thinking and asset allocation according to the previous model may no longer be appropriate. These are things that everyone should pay attention to in the new environment. We say great changes unseen in a century, and since this is the case, it is definitely not possible to look at the current world with the thinking of 100 years ago, so the best strategy last year was the macro strategy. Macro is a component with the largest return on investment, because it is a beta and exists in a broad spectrum. Alpha is an added bonus. Beta is salary, alpha is bonus, sometimes there is bonus, sometimes there is no penny, but beta is always there. In the past, it was a peaceful period, beta was very stable, and there was a fixed salary every year. This may not be the case in the future, and even the salary may be floating in the future. So this is the value we can bring to everyone as a macro person. At the same time, this is something that artificial intelligence and ChatGPT cannot replace.